We began writing an essay in response to the quote from Nelson Mandela that says, "It always seems impossible until it's done." We discussed what a thesis statement is, that it's the main point of your paper. We discussed that you had to have a main example in your paper as well. We discussed that your example also needed to be supported. Now, your main example and supporting details can be anything like a personal anecdote. It could be describing a historical event or historical character. It could be describing a current event and using a current figure. It could be a character from a movie. We discussed that it's important to have a truism in your essay as well. A truism is a universal truth. It is a statement that people across all cultures, all throughout the world, can connect with, can almost always agree on. And we also discussed how important it is to have a meaningful conclusion. It's so important to wrap up your essay and to leave your reader with something to ponder. We looked at a student's example of his first draft. We discovered that he had a thesis statement and that he was attempting to use a main point or a main example. And he had one of the supporting details, but he didn't go far enough in. And he has a truism, and he had a meaningful conclusion. So he has a good framework to work with here. But we've got to dress it up a little bit. So we'll think of this essay as being like the house frame, the boards, the beams, the sheetrock. After we edit and revise it, we have something we can work with. But we've got to make it better. We have to dress it up. So we have to imagine a scene that we can describe throughout our essay that can be connected to the prompt. The student's essay here was about Chuck Yeager and how he was able to do the impossible, which was travel at the speed of sound. Some examples that you can also use. Harriet Tubman did the impossible when she rescued almost 100 slaves through the Underground Railroad. Jackie Robinson broke all records, shattered lots of walls. The way that we do this is we take our edited and revised essay, the framework that we worked with, and we dress it up with snapshots. Snapshots are just a simple way of making your reader see and then connect to your thesis statement. Think of a picture. Now, you don't know this, but when you look at a picture, your brain is doing a lot more work than you are aware of. Your brain is not only visualizing what is in the picture, but your brain is using the other 4 senses as well. Your brain is disseminating whether there is a smell to connect to the memory. Perhaps you're looking at a picture of Thanksgiving when your family's sitting around the table and you can smell the wonderful aroma of Thanksgiving dinner. Your brain is also hearing the sounds in this image that's been captured. Maybe it's the sound of laughter at the table. Maybe it's the sound of your silly old aunt telling the same story over and over again. And then your brain is also using the sense of taste. Maybe that picture shows pumpkin pie on the table as well, and you're able to connect a taste to that image. Also, your brain is connecting the sense of touch. Now, that touch could be concrete or abstract. It could be concrete because you can feel your brother lean over and slug you in the shoulder. Maybe it's abstract. Maybe it's making you realize that that was the last Thanksgiving dinner that you had with your silly aunt that always told the stories. So a snapshot can do a lot of things for a reader. It connects your reader to the essay. You paint a portrait for them. You've got the framework, which we like to call our house. Now we have to decorate it. So we will weave in these snapshots to bring our writing to life. Now, if you'll recall, we wrote a response to "It always seems impossible until it is done." The student's essay that we used as an example was, he used Chuck Yeager. So imagine yourself in your hook, which is your attention getter, describing the scene of Chuck Yeager after taking off is flying in his airplane. And looking out the window of the cockpit, he sees the blue sky and the clouds. Paint that picture for your reader. The impossible is about to be done. Maybe he smells the jet fuel. Maybe he hears the roar of the engine. Perhaps he tastes the fear, because this is supposed to be an impossible feat, but he's going to attempt it. Maybe he tastes the danger. Maybe his hands are holding onto the controls and they're sweaty and they're nervous because he is attempting the impossible. Do you see how I keep connecting it back to the prompt? Paint that picture for your reader. Now then, when you go in, you've done your hook, and now you state your thesis, which we have here, which is, if one sets his heart and his mind to the task at hand, it can be accomplished. Now, after you'll see that thesis statement, you'll see the truism, which is a universal truth. The student says simply, success is simply a matter of the mind. People across all cultures can connect to that. So we move on to our next paragraph where we are actually going to explain the example and prove our idea or prove our thesis. So maybe in that particular snapshot, you want to go back in time. You want a flashback to when Yeager and his team of scientists and astronauts and pilots, what have you, are in a laboratory or wherever it may be, and they're developing the technology to be able to accomplish this particular attempt at traveling at the speed of sound. You give more details about that. Do some research. Find out everything you can and how can you connect it to your reader. And then your final snapshot will come in your meaningful conclusion. Perhaps you want to tie in to the first snapshot, but this time we'll see Chuck Yeager after he has landed on the ground, that he sees the accomplishment. He heard the sonic boom. He feels the pride that they accomplished the impossible. He tastes victory. He smells success. Also in relation to this particular quote that we responded to, you could use Harriet Tubman. Maybe your first snapshot, which will be your hook, will have something to do with her, one woman in the South, 1800s, hidden by the night, attempts to rescue the enslaved. Talk about the Underground Railroad. Then give your thesis. Put your truism in there somewhere. Then go to your next paragraph. Explain your example of Harriet Tubman even more. The impossible had to be done, and she, an escaped slave herself, had to try. Give those details. Perhaps an allusion. Use a literary device. In this allusion, she was nicknamed Moses in reference to Moses from the Bible, who freed the Hebrew slaves and walked them through the desert, and God parted the Red Sea for them, and he led them to the Promised Land, or on their way to the Promised Land, actually. That's important to Harriet Tubman's story. It shows that she, too, being nicknamed Moses, led close to 100 slaves to freedom in the North. She did the impossible. And her meaningful conclusion, when you wrap it up, you can restate your thesis, restate your point, and then finish that snapshot for us. One woman in the South in the 1800s who was hidden by the night actually rescued the enslaved through the Underground Railroad system. The impossible was done. Steve Jobs, he did the impossible. Your hook, having the ability to connect with people around the world instantaneously. Time travel in the palm of your hand. All of the knowledge of the world at your fingertips. Thesis statement, then your truism, then begin your next paragraph. Explain Steve Jobs as your example. Support what he did with details. Steve Jobs did the impossible, even in the midst of rejection and failure. He ended up creating portable technology that we all use today. Go to your meaningful conclusion. Restate your thesis. Finish the image. Finish the snapshot. Steve Jobs did the impossible. Because of his endeavors, we can also do the impossible. He gave us the tools. Sports is always an excellent way to tie in a snapshot. This one's about Michael Jordan. It uses a little bit of humor in it. There's no problem with humor. But remember, you can also use your own personal stories. Or you can use a character from a movie. There are no limits on this. Take your framework, which was the first original essay, and then dress it up with the snapshots. Here's an example. You'll see the snapshots that I have on the right side of the screen. You'll notice that I chose not to use snapshot number 3 for the final copy of the essay. I just didn't need it. It would be repetitive. And I was just fine with what I had produced with snapshots 1, 2, and 4. So read along with me. You'll notice in the margins I have outlined the layout or the organizational pattern of this particular essay. Remember, we were writing in response to the quote from Nelson Mandela that says, "It always seems impossible until it is done." So here we go. Here's the hook. Here's my first snapshot. Having the ability to connect with people around the world instantaneously is no longer a dream. It's a way of life. Traveling across time is possible today as well, and it rests in the palms of our hands. All of the knowledge of the world is at our fingertips and available at the click of a button or at the swipe of a screen. Nothing is impossible when one sets his mind to the task at hand and never gives up, even if that would be the easiest option. There's the thesis statement. That's the point I'm going to make. My reader now knows what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to introduce my example here. Just look to Steve Jobs for such inspiration. He had a lifelong love for electronics and made it his life's mission to change the world through his hobby and passion. It may seem cliche to some, but in reality, nothing is impossible if one chooses to stay the course. That is my truism. I believe that people across cultures can agree on that, and it connects with my thesis statement quite well. It also shows that I'm a knowledgeable citizen of the world, and it also shows that I have ideas of my own. Now that I've given my example, I'm going to continue in that same second paragraph with my supporting details. This is going to be my second snapshot where I show what my thesis is talking about. Steve Jobs never gave up on the dream that began in his garage decades ago. With his Apple Computers co-founder Steve Wozniak, Jobs had a revolutionary idea to bring the world to our doorsteps and to simplify life in general through computer devices. That idea evolved over time to meet the changing needs of society, and Jobs persevered and adapted to meet society's demands, thus creating the iPhone and iPads. He had been fired multiple times by his employers, and his ideas and products were rejected many times as well. Receiving funding to pursue his dreams was also difficult. Now I'm just going to wrap up what I talked about in that second paragraph. Here's my commentary. Staying the course was Jobs' only mindset, and he would not falter. Thankfully for the world, Jobs made it, and we have a plethora of technology that demonstrates his tenacity. Can you see in that particular paragraph, I've given my example, I've given my supporting details, and now my commentary, which connects back to the thesis statement, which answers the prompt. Now I just have to finish up. Here's my meaningful conclusion. Steve Jobs did the impossible. Because of his endeavors, we can also do the impossible, because he gave us the tools, computers. Here's my fourth snapshot. It all started in a garage in the mid-1970s. Do you see how I connected that to my first snapshot? I finished the picture. Now I restate my thesis. One man had a vision to do the impossible, and he did. It was done. Now we would score our essay on a score point 0 to 4 scale, with 4 being the best. If I were to look at score point 4, I could say with 100% accuracy that the form and the structure of my essay is appropriate to the charge, which would have been the prompt or the quote that we responded to. It was skillfully crafted. There is a clear thesis, and my ideas are strongly related to the thesis. My essay is unified and coherent. There are no gaps. There might be a little repetition, so I might want to consult a thesaurus, but I'd have to be careful with that. It is easy to follow. I use nice transitional phrases. In the development of the ideas section of score point 4, I have specific, well-chosen details that add substance. I hope that it was thoughtful and engaging. I used unique experiences or examples that develop the essay, by example being Steve Jobs. I take a unique perspective or a point of view on the charge. Well, it was pretty straightforward. I could rewrite it from the perspective of Steve Jobs and write it in first-person point of view. That would be a creative thing to do. Maybe I'll think about doing that. And I show that I fully understood the charge. Now, with the use of language and its conventions, vivid and expressive word choice, I felt like I did that pretty well. It was basic, nothing too flowery. I could always fix it, though, if I wanted to. The writer has keen awareness of the expository purpose, which is informational writing, and I did have effective sentence structure. I didn't just use simple and complex sentences. I have compound in there, and I have compound complex. There are little to no errors in the sentence structure, spelling, capitalization, punctuation, or grammar because I checked it, and I checked it often. If I were grading this, I would give myself a score point 3 or a score point 4. Perhaps I'd give myself a score point 3 because if you look over in score point 4, it might have been really interesting if in the second section where it says writer may use unique experiences or examples, or maybe writer takes a unique perspective or point of view on the charge, it might be pretty interesting to rewrite it from Steve Jobs' perspective, saying the very same things, but using first-person point of view instead. So I think I'll be a little hard on myself and give myself a score point 3 on this. But I'm just pushing the door open for a score point 4. One of the things I like to do after we write is I like for ourselves to sit down and think to ourselves, what are the 3 improvements that I have to make in order to be a better writer next time? And are there still 3 areas of weakness that I really need my teacher to address? I love the Surviving the Writing Challenge, where we are with our groups and we read the essays and we write compliments, specific compliments on them, and then 3 constructive criticisms on each essay because there's no such thing as a perfect essay. And then we rank them in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd place. We learn better from each other than we do from just a teacher allowing her red pen to bleed all over your paper. And what you have learned today is how to organize and develop a simple essay